Hello and welcome to The Green Room by Deloitte. This is the podcast where we ask the tricky questions about the world around us. I'm George, and today we're asking, does the way we bank leave some people behind? Hello, thank you so much for downloading this episode of the Green Room podcast. You can find all of our previous episodes on our website, which is deloitte.co.uk/Green Room podcasts. And today we're talking about financial inclusion or financial exclusion, perhaps. And joining with me today is the very financially savvy Lizzie Elston. How are you, Lizzie?
Less financially savvy after Christmas, I think, is how I am, George. Yeah, very well, thank you. Happy New Year to you. And also very much looking forward to this conversation today.
And to you, I think one of the jokes about 2020 was it's like a panto, it's behind you, and I think that's the main lesson we can have at the moment. And yes, money makes the world go round, and I think January is that time of the year when we're all feeling quite conscious about that. So it's probably quite a apt time to talk about this topic. But yeah, I mean, you know, Lizzie, I don't know about you, but I'm certainly not a financial expert. So who have we got with us in the studio to talk us through this week's big question, which, as a reminder for listeners, is, does the way we bank leave some people behind?
Yeah, I'm also very pleased to have some experts here today, George. So we are joined by Lucy Traynor. Lucy leads Deloitte's Better Banking team and is passionate about sustainable finance and improving financial inclusion. Lucy is focused on enabling the financial services industry to have a greater positive impact on society and our planet. Hi, Lucy.
Hi, great to be here.
Thanks for joining us. And we are joined by Jill Jackson. Jill is Managing Director at The Big Exchange. Launched in October, The Big Exchange is a movement that aims to transform the lives of millions of people by building a fairer financial system that works for everyone. Welcome, Jill.
Hi, Lizzie. Hi, George. Thanks for having me today. It's good to see you.
Great to see you. Thanks, Jill. And I think, you know, we're still, you know, operating under virtual remote circumstances, and I think we have a virtual icebreaker bucket question just to get us warmed up. Is that right, Lizzie?
We do indeed. So the icebreaker, which has just come pinging into my screen, what is your favourite winter treat?
I'll take that one, Lucy, says I'm north of the border and generally way colder than anyone else that's on the cold. My favourite winter treat, I would say, is a woolly hat, a big jacket and a dog walk would be my favourite winter treat, as long as it's not horizontal rain and it's just nice, crisp, cold weather.
That sounds great. Followed by, I don't know, sitting down in front of a log fire, I imagine.
Yes, absolutely. And maybe some mulled wine, although even though that season's passed, why does it have to pass?
Absolutely. Lucy, what's your favourite winter treat?
Love it. Well, also love what Jill said, but I'll go for a slightly more unhealthy version. I've got 2 little children, 4-year-old twins, and we've been doing a lot of winter baking. So a Yule log has been a favourite of theirs, and we're actually also vegan, so it's been quite fun veganising some traditional winter recipes.
Wonderful. Sounds great. George?
I'm far more on the that sort of top shelf sort of stuff, really, with anything with a percentage sign, ideally. But no, I think I'm in the mulled wine camp. But I've got a nice fully stocked drinks table after Christmas, which I think will probably get me through the dark months of January, February, and others.
Keep going. I think I'm with you, Jill. I think it's that winter walk. We've actually just got a puppy, which means that our walks are currently limited to about 10 minutes, and they're not so much walks as just sort of stopping whilst the dog sniffs everything that it possibly can get its nose to. So the walking has definitely reduced, but it's still lovely to be able to get out into the fresh air.
Great, thanks for that, Lizzie, and Jill and Lucy. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I think, we're sort of talking about sort of a bit of a complex topic today. So it'll be really good actually if you could perhaps briefly talk about your careers and how you found yourselves working in the sort of finance space, if that's all right. Jill, do you want to kick that off?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, George. So my career in financial services began, 25 years ago now, when I joined Scottish Amicable Investment Managers, who were a Glasgow investment company that, you know, sold PEPs and what were the old ISAs in those days to people. And my first ever job and my first day was emptying a sack of post that had tear out slips from the newspaper with checks stapled to them for people to invest their money, and which clearly would not happen now, but was very commonplace in those days. And from that day on, I've just became totally fascinated by people investing money, where it was going, what it was doing, what it did for the individual, what it did for the companies they invested in. And when ethical investments began, I took a real interest in that. And I was always really interested just in the purpose around financial services, like what difference could it really make? So I've always taken a really keen interest in that. And throughout my years in asset management, I've really focused on, what difference the financial services sector can make for society. More in latter years, more the planet as well, but always really interested in, that point. I think traditionally what you saw in investments particularly was that it was all about exclusion, so what are you not investing in? And now it's really interesting to see, in similar vein to financial exclusion and financial inclusion, now we're talking about how do we include companies that are making that positive impact. So it seemed like a really natural move for me to move into the world where how can we really look at the broader financial services proposition for people, and how can we make it more inclusive? What do we need to change about it? Because there's lots of opportunity there that we can make changes in the financial services sector, even in small ways that will make quite a big impact. So what are those things and how can we work on it? And I've had the great pleasure of working with Lucy over the last year on the big exchange and really putting into practice some of those things that I've always dreamt about throughout my time in financial services.
I'm sure we'll explore some of those changes shortly. But Lucy, perhaps could you give a bit of a background about your experience in financial services too?
Sure, George. So actually my background's a little bit unusual because I haven't always worked in financial services. And actually when I was growing up, I had quite a skepticism and was quite untrusting about the whole financial services industry. So if you were to have asked me sort of when I was a teenager, I would never have imagined that you'd have found me here today working in financial services at Deloitte. I imagined that I'd end up sort of probably in the public sector. So I at university studied theology and then international relations. I went first of all into the Teach First programme, which of course we know well at Deloitte, being a partner of theirs. And I was one of the first cohorts of that programme. And then I went to work in the charity sector, again with an education focus, before I moved into management consultancy. So it was quite a different journey, but looking back, I always say the golden thread for me was about sort of having a real strong sense of mission. And I think, I'm sure it's something Jill and I will come to talk more about as well, because I think what I'm doing today, leading the Better Banking team at Deloitte, is all about bringing a sense of mission and purpose to financial services. So I feel I've brought a lot of that experience I had both from Teach First and working in the charity area, and trying to embed more of that sense into financial services. So I've now worked with financial services for coming up to 10 years, and most of my clients have been in the retail side of things. But what I'm really passionate about is helping our clients be more focused on how they can help society and how they can help have a positive impact on the planet as well. And I know you've covered a lot of sustainability in these Green Room podcasts before. And I guess today, financial inclusion, I see that as very aligned actually with the social side of sustainability.
It would be really great to kind of have a clear definition of what we're talking about when we're talking about financial inclusion. And we sort of touched on it a little bit, but perhaps Jill, could you explain kind of what we mean by this, just to help us get to grips with the topic today?
Yeah, I think the difficult thing with financial inclusion as a topic is it's like risk. It can mean something different to every single one of us, right? So for me, financial inclusion might mean that, I get a preferred rate on a mortgage, for example. That might mean financial inclusion for me. For my niece, it might mean that, she can make a rent payment as a student next month. There's all sorts of different, and what access to services does she need to make that happen? And I think it's one of these topics that is quite difficult sometimes to quantify or simplify. But I attended an event a couple of years ago, and it was actually about inclusion in the workplace. But it really stuck with me. The lady, stood up and talked for a while, and she said quite simply what it comes down to is what you're doing actively excluding anyone. And if the answer to that question is yes, then it means you're not being inclusive. So if you're, even take an employer's point of view, if you make your team meeting every day at 9 o'clock when 3 of the people are doing the school run, then you're excluding them, right? Simple. And I think for me, and certainly all throughout the big exchange and what we've been doing is we're constantly asking ourselves, by writing this way or expressing it this way, are we excluding anyone from that? How would we score that? So yeah, for me, I think financial inclusion is it's a really broad subject, but quite simply at the heart of it is, if you're excluding anyone, then you're not being financially inclusive.
Thanks, Jill. Lucy, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do agree. The way I normally sort of just boil it down is to make financial products and services both accessible and also affordable for everybody who needs them. So yeah, I think that's very much in the same vein as what Jill's just said. And often we're talking about individuals, but I would say as well that we can expand this to look at small businesses and so on as well. So, obviously there was a lot of attention around the Black Lives Matter movement in the summer, and some of the statistics that we were looking at as part of our research on financial inclusion and the events of 2020 were showing some quite shocking statistics actually around sort of Black business owners and their ability for getting a business loan. And for some Black business owners, they were less likely to be approved for a loan than their white counterparts, for example. So I'd say that that's an example of business-focused inclusion as well.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add to that, just when you were talking, Lucy, it made me think of it. In the financial services sector, there's sometimes good reason to exclude some people from certain products, right? So if a product is extremely high risk and you're asking somebody with no savings to invest in something that is like really high risk, then it's right to exclude some people, right? But the thing for me is, have you gone through that process to identify that that's the right course of action? And as long as you've gone through that process and you're able to stand behind, it's right that this type of person with this type of financial profile shouldn't access that, then that's fine. But equally, there are so many baseline services that we assume in the UK are accessible to everybody. And in actual fact, when you look under the bonnet, they're not. And that's something, those baseline services are something that we really need to make sure we address properly.
It's a pretty shocking statistic that there's 14.3 million people living in poverty in the UK who may not have access, I guess, to the services that we're talking about. Is that something that you see improving over time? What's your view of how that's sort of being dealt with and why it's currently such an important issue?
Sadly not, Lizzie, in terms of is it improving. I think actually the effects of last year of 2020 and the coronavirus has most likely made that number far bigger. So it's a number that we're still referring to, but actually I think we could easily assume at least an extra million, if not more, people have been pushed into poverty as a result of the pandemic. We've actually looked at how the effect of the pandemic has actually sort of broadened the gap in between the rich and poor. So whilst some people who are well off and maybe retained a fairly stable job have been able to work from home, may actually have saved money from not commuting, for example. So some wealthier people have found that they've actually been able to have more savings increased and so on. But for those who have been on maybe less stable income or have been furloughed and therefore lost a source of income or potentially even been made redundant as a result of the pandemic, we know that for those people, like they have really, many of them sort of tipped into a more financially unstable position. So there were some really shocking statistics by the Trussell Trust in terms of food bank use, which showed that at the beginning of the pandemic, I think as much as half of the people accessing food banks had never had to use one before. So you're sort of looking at the scale of sort of the newly poor because of COVID. And I think even though we're sort of facing into a new year now, sadly, obviously, COVID's not quite behind us just yet. And I think it's, we've probably got a bit of a time before we can really truly say that things are going to be getting better.
And Jill, presumably, this is somewhere that the Big Exchange has got even more involved. How is the Big Exchange helping to solve this current crisis?
Yeah, so the app that we're about to launch at the Big Exchange is really focused on giving everybody access to services that ordinarily, they may not be able to access. They can, if they've got a bank account, they can link their bank account, they can categorise spending, understand more about where their money's going and what it's doing. And that's really important, and also provide connections to places that can help them. So, for example, if there are charities that could help them or services that can help them, then we'll provide that connection point as well through the technology that we use in the app. And I think it's really important that's one of the barriers, I think, for a lot of people in that poverty number that you've just said there of 14.3 million, which is just a horrendous number, right? Because there's there's 4.6 million children in there as well. So there's a huge amount of, children living in poverty in the UK, which just feels wrong for a country that is so wealthy, right? And I think everybody's united around that point. So coming back to what you asked originally about, do we think that can improve? I absolutely do think it can improve, Lizzie. And I think that between technology and every sector of collaboration across the sectors in the UK, between the third sector, the corporate world, and social enterprises, that there can be real significant change made here. And I think also the regulators potentially got a role to play in that. So I think if we want that number to change, it requires everybody to, get this movement around what do we want to see change as a society and what do we need to do to make it happen. And I think at the Big Exchange, we'll use technology to help with that, but we need that collaboration from across all these sectors that are doing great work to bring that to life and start to get that number down, right, instead of seeing it going up.
I think financial literacy is quite a big part of this, isn't it? And we had a previous episode where we talked about how do we learn to adult, how do we become grown up, sort of thing. And I think this sort of skirts around that issue. And does the problem lie in children and education around financial systems and how it all works? Do you think, Jill?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was never taught in school, how to budget, to, run a house. I was never told, say if you ever go and buy a flat, Jill, you're going to have a deposit. You'll have to, pay electricity. That doesn't come for free. All of these things that seem like so basic, kids come out of the other end of school and don't know that stuff, right? And there's some aspect of that you think don't make them grow up too young, right? But then they have to grow up with a sense of reality. And I think for our future generations particularly, it gets less and less likely that the state will look after them in their old age as well, right? By the time and they'll be working till, crikey, goodness knows when, right? So it becomes even more important that they're furnished with the right level of information to be able to look after themselves and those around them and the rest of society, right? I do think that there's some great work on out there. So there's an organisation called TISA that I've partnered with my bank. They recently won a Better Society Award that are doing great work in schools and have got some really good insights that teaching kids this information at primary school is like the best time to do it. You get much better results. So they're working really hard across primary schools in the UK. And then there's another company called Miss Money Ready that does some really good online learning tools for children. There are lots of really good things out there and it's part of the national curriculum, but how it's taught within the national curriculum varies really significantly between areas in the UK. So I definitely think it's got a role to play. However, if we only concentrate on the kids that are in education, we miss out the big load of people in between that have already gone through that, system where they've not been taught it. So I think technology is a great way. Most of the younger generation consume nearly everything via their phone, right? There's a brilliant opportunity for technology to push out. And the Money Advice Service do great, educational videos and stuff. So there is some really good information out there. And I think for us at the Big Exchange, one of the things is how can we pull in all those things that are best in class and bring it together in one place to make it simple for somebody so they don't have to go to 15, 16 touch points and put huge amounts of effort into it just to find out some basic information.
Lucy, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I definitely agree. We've actually been talking to a group of students recently about this very topic. So we've been talking to one of our partner schools and some year 12, so sort of 17-year-old students about financial education, what they feel they're getting from school, what they feel that they'd like to get more of. And there's definitely a consensus amongst them that there is some recognition that they are receiving some financial education, which is great. There's also a big request for much more. So they want to understand topics like green finance and, what's the impact of banks on climate and so on. And they want to understand, some of the topics you mentioned about just growing up, like understanding how taxes work is something that comes up again and again. How am I going to afford to go to university? How do I afford to start saving? So those sorts of questions. And we're actually working with them, with Jill and the Big Exchange at the moment in terms of thinking about what sort of bite-sized education would engage that sort of age group. And one of the things we're sort of keen to address is personalised education. So rather than a sort of one size fits all, here's a video to watch on taxes, for example, it's kind of intervening at the right point of someone's life to say, and potentially using technology and data to do that in a sort of really useful way. So, for example, if you can see through an app that I'm only making the minimum payment on my credit card, for example, and that's therefore costing me a lot of money in interest, it's kind of giving me a little nudge to say, hey, Lucy, why don't you watch this short clip, understand how interest works and what happens if you only pay your minimum payment. And that sort of bite-sized education that's relevant to what's going on for me right now, we think is way more likely to be useful to someone rather than sort of just pointing in the direction of generic content.
Yeah, because I think just to add to that, I think I've got a 16-year-old, right? He doesn't feel like he needs to be educated on money, right? It's not like he's sitting thinking, do you know what, I'm not going to watch that YouTube clip with the footballer that I want to watch. I'm going to go and find out about tax, and that's not. So I think Lucy's point about intervening at a relevant point is really critical, because that's when it's got its maximum impact.
Yeah, that sounds sensible and sounds very clever. Yeah, and your point about teaching kids at primary school level bodes well for my 5-year-old. Perhaps she'll come out of it as a sort of future Gordon Gekko, and I can retire early maybe. But who knows?
We talked a bit about technology. You've mentioned apps, obviously, and using mobile phones. Is there anything else out there that's sort of quite new and novel coming through technology-wise to support this area? And the second part to my question, which I guess we'll touch on a bit, is for those who are unable to use the technology. Perhaps they are of a certain generation where they don't have access to the technology which we would need, and mobile phones. How do we help those?
Well, I guess open banking would be an obvious one for us to talk about, Jill, and I don't know if you want to pick it up, or I'm happy to. But we've been looking at, so open banking APIs enable people to see all of their accounts and all of their money essentially in one easy place, which is really helpful in terms of education, in terms of educating people as to where they are in terms of their finances. So the fact that I can use open banking to see, a savings account, my current account, and a credit card all in one place, so I can get a true picture of where I'm at and set saving goals for myself and things like that, is definitely a really useful technology in this space.
Yeah, I think the open finance, the changes that we've seen in recent years in open finance, open banking being part of that, and we will continue to see, is really key, because it democratizes the information that exists on that person to the person, right? It doesn't just exist for organizations behind the scenes to look into, what accounts you've got and what credit cards you've got and, what your profile is. It allows you to have access to that information and furnishes you with all the information that can help you make that change. In terms of those that are digitally excluded, Lizzie, it's a really good question, because it's a real challenge around technology. And I know that the Big Issue Group, who are the co-founders of the Big Exchange, worked really hard during the COVID pandemic to help vendors, become digital, because, people weren't willing to hand over cash or whatever it may be. And that's been a kind of slow burn for them over the years, as less people have cash in their pocket and want to pay by a card. And they've done a brilliant job and partnered with some, high street banks on not only helping vendors access accounts, but also giving them the hardware that they need to access the account. And it's not that people are able to interact with digital technology, no problem. People are spending millions of pounds about making that really easy, right? There's a whole industry of people talking about simplifying that so that it makes it really easy to use. The issue is, can you get the product, the hardware, into the hand of the person to do it? And I think that there's some really interesting initiatives going on across the industry about how you go about doing that. So you're democratizing that access as well. So it's great to see some big corporates. I know EE, for example, have done a huge amount on this in terms of getting devices to people that are digitally excluded. And I think we need to see more of that to make sure that poverty number that we've seen of 14.3 million doesn't mean that digital exclusion keeps increasing. So yeah, I think it's on the corporate sector to ensure that they have got the relevant programs in place to make that happen.
I was going to pick up on the point about older people as well, who can traditionally be quite digitally excluded. So I can tell a very real life story to me, actually, which is my grandmother, who in her 90s. Like a couple of years ago, I was at her house and she asked me to open one of her bills that had come. And I opened it and it was a house insurance bill. And I was absolutely horrified to see the amount of house insurance she was paying on her tiny bungalow, which was considerably more than I was paying on my house. And essentially it was because she'd been with the same company for years and years. So it's what in financial inclusion terms we'd call the loyalty penalty. So the company's essentially taken advantage of their loyal customer and put the premium up year on year. And you know, someone in my position, like me opening that up, like obviously the first thing that I did was go on to sort of compare the market type aggregator site and quickly find her a cheaper deal. But I was outraged that because she's obviously not really in the digital world, I mean, she's in her 90s, was unlikely to sort of suddenly get that much digitally online. But yeah, I mean, from my perspective, it's something actually that the FCA have recently picked up, and I know that they're sort of now addressing the loyalty penalty. But it's an area, I think, where the financial services could do a lot more. So where we're recognising that certain groups of people, and older people is an obvious one, are not accessing these ways that would mean that they could have access to cheaper prices. What's the company doing to make sure that they're defaulting to a fair option rather than one that's taking advantage of them?
But I think from a corporate point of view, it's about governance and that kind of holding corporates to account in terms of ESG, you know, are they acting in accordance with those standards? And I think we've seen some great changes in recent years for corporates on that, and that's only going to continue. And the more corporates have to account for all of those types of behaviours, then the better.
Did you know at Deloitte we support social enterprises through our 5 Million Futures programme? Like Loaf Catering, part of Now Group in Northern Ireland, they support people with learning difficulties and autism into jobs with a future. If you're based in Belfast, you can now order Loaf's delicious food to go. If you're further away, just visit loafcatering.com, where you'll find beautiful mugs handmade by Loaf's in-house potter. Now back to our topic of the day.
I think the pandemic sort of showed that it gave sort of banks and financial services companies an opportunity to sort of give those funds to people who needed it. So maybe if you're in a self-employed worker or you needed a mortgage holiday and things like that. Does that address that gap again? The people who haven't got who haven't got a bank account? Because I think, as you said, Jill, there's a serious proportion of people who just aren't being captured in that way. And how do those institutions address that gap?
I mean, I think what's the number for people in the UK that don't have a bank account? It's about 1.2 million, I think. I hope I've got that right. I think it is. And not surprisingly, the Big Issue group know a lot about that and that number. And once you start to look underneath that number, I think you get round to about 400,000 people within that group want a bank account but can't find it really hard to get one. And that can often be as a result of, you know, they don't necessarily have the right ID. But I do think that you've seen really good change in recent years from high street banks on that, in terms of them supporting people like the Big Issue, to help vendors open accounts. Indeed, there's a whole lot of initiatives within high street banks to help people that are in those vulnerable situations. So there is good change. And I think it'd be really easy for Lucy and I to sit here and talk about all the terrible things. But I think it's much better in these situations to focus on what's being done well and try and get more of that to be done.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I do think there's some good initiatives there, and banks are working with people that are on, really vulnerable and excluded people. I think a lot of the time it's a lot of people in that situation are really expert at tactically managing their money without having a bank account, right? And it's actually just the barrier of stepping over that door to the bank. And if they can get the right support, and that's kind of where I would come back to that collaboration between the third sector, corporates, all working together to put the right support around that person to get them onto that financial services ladder, and then also support them in the early stages of that, to get the right impact. So I do think there's some really good work on that. And it's complex, right? Because it's woven into the digital exclusion piece. And that's why I think a lot of the time for people in that situation, you need a personal touch. You need somebody supporting you throughout it. So digital in the first instance isn't necessarily going to be the thing that helps it for you. But what that support around you will help is then getting you into that world where you can then use that digital world to improve your financial resilience over time.
Yeah, I would really agree with you, Jill. And there are lots of positive examples. Like I mean, we don't want to make it sound like it's all doom and gloom, because definitely there are some great innovative examples coming out of the sector. Like I'd give a mention to HSBC's no fixed address bank account, which they have done in collaboration with the third sector, so with Shelter and a number of other homeless charities, which actually means that homeless people can now apply for a HSBC bank account without having to have a sort of proof of fixed address and so on, which is a real great example of helping people in the sector. And equally, as you said, George, like, you know, in the pandemic, we have also seen some great stuff from banks in terms of mortgage holidays and support and so on. And actually, a Deloitte survey that we ran in the summer showed that I think it was a third of UK banking customers actually said that they now trust their bank more as a result of the support that they've seen during COVID. Obviously, there's room for improvement there, but still, that's quite a big figure in terms of increased trust over the summer months as well. Equally, actually, on the flip side of that, we saw that for people that had changed their bank accounts, the main reason that they did that was attracted to a bank that was having a greater social impact. So I think it's something that's really been on the forefront of banking customers' minds this summer, as well as they've sort of seen how banks have been able to help them or potentially not being able to help them.
Yeah. And I think, again, technology also plays a part for those that do have a digital access point. There are some newer kind of challenger banks disrupting that market as well and saying, you know, you can open an account with us with lower level of ID, and at least that's an entry point for you. It may not be the best place for you forever, but at least it gets you access to the banking world and be able to, you know, make payments in a world where, you know, that initial period of COVID where everything went almost cashless, you know, because people were terrified to touch banknotes at the very beginning. So it's interesting what's going on across the sector, I think, in terms of addressing the needs of those people. And the thing that we really want to, as an industry, do is focus on the best in class there and how we can get more and more people access to that.
And Jill, what about the other side of it? With obviously you've got opening this up and being more inclusive, the other side being where the money is invested. So, you know, you mentioned earlier in the big exchange, which supports investment in sustainable organisations, or those supporting the environment or wildlife or poverty alleviation. Do you see a real growing trend in investment in more ethical funds?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the product that we launched in October was an investment product. So it was giving access to everybody in the UK to investments that can make a positive impact to people or the planet. And the FT just recently published an article. So between April and July 2020, there were more flows into ESG funds in that quarter than there had been in the previous 5 years into those types of funds, right? So there is an absolute demand for this. And again, coming back to what we discussed earlier about the role the regulators got to play versus demand from the public versus the third sector versus the corporate world, you're now seeing, you know, the regulator saying to financial advisors in the UK, you know, you have to factor in the ESG. So I do think that we'll only see this continuing. And for me, as somebody that's worked in this industry for years, I've always struggled to understand why you wouldn't do that, right? It's not why would you invest that way, it's why would you not, if it means that we have a more sustainable planet and, you know, the future generations have got the benefit of living in the, you know, a nice environment and are able to go and see wildlife in the place where they belong, then I've never really understood why you wouldn't do that. But what's brilliant now is it's got this real momentum behind it where people are starting to really understand the power of that their money can have.
It's quite interesting how you've chosen that investment piece, that sort of investment market as a way to tackle financial inclusion. Is there a bit of a barrier to entry, or you know, the prospect of investing in funds and things for people who are you know, haven't had that experience before? Do you find?
Yeah, absolutely. There is, George. Yeah. So in my experience over the last 20 odd years, I'm doing various different customer research and focus groups. The single biggest barrier to investment is jargon. the investment world talks in a language that is not relatable or relevant to people. So generally what people that are savers that may become investors do is they go on, have a look, think they can't be talking to me because I don't know what they mean. So I'll just not do that, and I'll stay in my savings account and not. And listen, staying in your savings account and having cash savings is important, but having all of your money in cash savings over time maybe, is something that everybody should have a look at, and work out whether that's best for them, because that's not risk-free because of inflation as well. So I do think that for me, the financial inclusion point is really relevant to the investment part of the big exchange, because, well, let's just take women as an example. If as many women had an ISA as men, there would be another 103 billion assets under management in the UK, right? And one of the main reasons, other than jargon, is risk. And when you look at a lot of the behavioural information around it, women feel that they're not furnished with the relevant information to allow them to make that decision for one reason or another, whatever that may be. It can be different for every person, but it's really important for us. And throughout our, building everything to do with the big exchange and the journey was, is that jargon? And we've even taken the impact and how we describe the impact and turned that into a medal system where each of the funds get gold, silver, bronze medal, and then people can drill down and get the relevant information to them. So if they want more information, they can get it, but they can also have it at the highest level as well. And that's worked really, really well in terms of people connecting with that and it resonating with them. So for me, the financial inclusion bit around the investments on the big exchanges, one, everybody can have access, and two, are we describing it in a way that makes it relevant to them, that they can understand? And I think that that's something that has been really important for us, both in terms of the risk they're taking, the financial return they can expect, and the impact. So all of those things, and how do you make sure you get that across?
There's also a perception, I think, like certainly we've seen anecdotally with some of the focus groups we've done with young people recently, that they're saying things like, oh, I couldn't be an investor. Like they're assuming that they need to have thousands of pounds before they can sort of imagine themselves being an investor in inverted commas. But actually, when we're saying, well, look at Jill's product, for example, you can invest from a minimum of £25 a month, and they're, still a lot of money, especially for a young person, but it's a lot lower than they thought it was going to be. So I think just breaking down some of those myths is also quite helpful.
I did have a play around actually as part of my research for this, and even I understood the medal system. So I got through that, which is good. Yeah.
I'm glad to hear it, George. Glad to hear it.
You know where to invest your millions now, George. What about? I feel like we're sort of swinging between some sad statistics and conversation, and then very positive. But sort of going back again to some of the issues with financial exclusion. I've read that people who are financially excluded are more likely to experience a never-ending debt cycle, and of course, this will impact mental health. So mental health must be so inextricably linked with all of this. What are some of the possible solutions to this?
One of the really tragic but also positive stories from last year was the campaign around Stop the Debt Threat letters. So you may have seen this. There was a campaign from Money and Mental Health Institute around the threatening language that's used when somebody has not been able to afford to pay their debt back. So that the letters that they receive from the lender used to have some very punchy, quite threatening, nasty really language in them. And one reason why it really kind of struck a chord with me is I remember my mum receiving those letters when I was a kid. It's one of the reasons, just coming back to what I said earlier, that I never imagined I'd work in financial services. Gave me quite a sort of negative perception of the whole banking industry and made me think banks aren't really here to help us. They're here to kind of make our lives more difficult. And there was a really tragic statistic that was posted by Money and the Mental Health Institute as part of this campaign, which is that 100,000 people a year were attempting suicide as a result of problem debt. The people sort of in this sort of really dire situations, and obviously a really extreme link there with mental health. The positive side of this story is that they were successful in that campaign, and the government agreed to change. There was a law essentially that was forcing lenders to put this quite threatening language in there. And now that law has been changed, which is a real milestone, obviously, and really great. However, I will say, obviously, there's still more that can be done. that just highlights how strong the link is between people that have money worries. Obviously, sort of suicide attempt is an absolute extreme version of that, but there's plenty of people that are sitting in work, for example, people that are even in employment that have money worries that are getting in the way of their ability to do their job, getting in the way of their relationships, getting in the way of them living their lives. And so this is it's a really important topic, and especially with COVID, this would have really increased. So as part of a survey that Deloitte did in the summer of 2020, we saw that almost half, I think it was 45% of UK bank customers had experienced an increase in worry, depression or anxiety because of the financial worries associated with COVID. So it's definitely, Lizzie, I think it's one of the biggest and most important parts of this topic. And, it would be great to see banks doing more on this as well. And there are some great examples, as I've mentioned, but I think it's definitely an area where we can would like to see a bit more.
For me, Lizzie, on that, I think this is where this issue rubs up against the technology solution for me personally, because technology tends to provide a binary solution to an issue. And this issue around a never-ending debt cycle and mental health is a human issue. So how do you make the technology adapt to that human issue? And I do think the regulator in particular has done some good work in recent years on helping financial institutions identify vulnerable people. But the best way to deal with somebody in that situation is to have a person help them, right? It's not, sometimes the anonymity of technology actually works to a certain extent, but helping that person get through that is a real challenge and requires human beings to help with that.
It seems like a fairly simple, just mind shift change, really, doesn't it? It's a customer service thing. Surely they want to keep that customer for the long term, because that's a better return on investment. So yeah, it seems like a bit of a mind shift thing, and yeah, it would be fascinating to see if that does change.
It's a really interesting one, George. We've spoken to a few of our banking clients about it actually during 2020, and one of the things that often comes up, one of the difficulties that they're facing is sort of this idea of where do you draw the line, and we don't want to be seen as playing God type thing. So you take problem gambling, which is obviously a sort of addictive behavior that's really increased as a result of COVID again. That's something that banks could notice in their data. And like Jill said, they could sort of almost predict the customer's behavior, and they could, if they chose to, intervene. So it might be one area where we would say, actually we think that might be quite a good thing for you to nudge the customer and say, hey, did you know that we've got, you can turn gambling off, for example, on your app, so you can block yourself almost from gambling. But the banks are often sort of saying, yes, that may be good, but we don't want to kind of offend the customer. We don't want to go too far. Where do we draw the line? And so it's not always black and white. Although in that situation, I would argue that a nudge would probably be quite helpful, like putting it back in the customer's hands to say, do you want to turn this off? It's in your hands to make the choice if you want to. But there's some of the sort of struggles that our clients are typically facing with, wondering, how far do they intervene on certain issues.
Well, Lucy and Jill, thank you so much for coming today and sharing your financial expertise with us. I think we've really tried to tackle this very large, juicy subject, but it's been really fascinating. Jill, I think perhaps could you just end by explaining a bit more about the app which you mentioned?
Absolutely, George. The app, the Big Exchange, surprisingly, not surprisingly called the Big Exchange, is available on the Apple and Google Store for downloads now.
Excellent. We'll make sure there's a link to that in our show notes. And Lucy, I think you touched on this, the research coming out very soon, if not already out by the time you listen to this. But perhaps could you give a bit of an overview about what that's going to look at?
Sure, thank you, George. So yes, our Deloitte paper, Growth Through Financial Inclusion, is looking at all of the research that we did during 2020, looking at what's the problem with financial inclusion, the impact of the pandemic, and crucially, how we believe the retail banking sector can react.
Fantastic. That sort of positive note might bring us to get a bit of a wrap on this week's question, if that's all right. A short few words on just answering the question, which is, does the way we bank leave some people behind?
Yeah, sure. So I think for me, given that the answer's got to be short. Sadly, my short answer is yes. The way that we bank currently does leave some people behind. But I want to also leave on a positive note to say that there are plenty of good examples of where we're seeing the sector become more inclusive. And we just are hopeful that we can help accelerate that more and more as we go into 2021.
And like Lucy, I would have to say yes to that. But what I would say is that I think society has got the power to demand the change. So if we all don't put up with those stats that you've told us about, Lizzie, if we all choose not to want to be looking at the same stats in 2 years' time, then we all work in this world and we all have the ability to change it. So I think it's down to us to make that positive step to demand the change.
It's such a fascinating topic, and I'm sure we'll revisit this again. And it's really all-encompassing and something which I think we can all relate to, and all have examples of elderly relatives or kids or whatever who are sort of touched by this. So I think it's thank you so much for sort of adding your thoughts and expertise on this today. It's been really helpful.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks very much, both.
Yeah, thanks very much. It's been great.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of The Green Room. We hope you enjoyed it, and you can find all of our previous episodes on our webpage. Just go to deloitte.co.uk/Green Room Podcasts. There's also a link to our relatively new blog page there, which goes into a bit more detail about some of our previous topics. And you can also find out more about our 5 Million Futures programme, which has been heavily involved in the world of financial inclusion.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Green Room by Deloitte. We'll be back next time with another big question. This podcast is produced by our very own pod squad and hosted by George Parrett, Lizzie Elston and Ethan Worth. Thanks to our creative studio for their technical support. Original music by Ali Barrett from our consulting team.